I need to tell you about the drive. Not because I think you'll believe me, I'm past that. I need to tell you because I'm selling my car next week, and once I do, I won't have a reason to think about roads anymore. And I want the shape of what happened to exist somewhere outside my head before I let that go. This was October of last year. I was relocating from Tucson to Knoxville. Not for a job, not for a relationship. My mother had died in July, and I'd spent the summer collapsing her 40-year life in a rented duplex into 14 boxes and a bag of things for goodwill. And somewhere in the middle of that, I decided I didn't want to live in a place where the light never softened. I wanted the weather. I wanted trees that did something in autumn. I picked Knoxville because a college friend had a garage apartment open and the rent was reasonable. And that was enough reason. I didn't need a good reason. I needed a direction. I could have done the drive in 2 days with a motel stop. I chose to do it in one push. Tucson to Knoxville is about 20 hours if you take the I-10 east to the I-20 to the I-59 up through Birmingham, then cut northeast. I left at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, which would put me in Knoxville around noon on Wednesday. I had a cooler full of water and cold brew, a bag of gas station protein bars, and a full tank. My car was a 2017 Honda CR-V with 108,000 miles on it, mechanically sound and recently serviced. Everything I owned was in the back, packed tight. I mention this because later the weight of the cargo mattered. The first 11 hours were fine. I drove through southern New Mexico at sunset, crossed into Texas outside El Paso as it got dark, and settled into the long, flat emptiness of I-10 East through the part of Texas where nothing happens for hours. The road was straight. The sky was enormous and black. I had a podcast on, then music, then nothing. I liked the silence. I liked the engine sound, the tires on asphalt, and the occasional shudder when a truck passed going west. I was calm. I was calmer than I'd been in months. Driving at night through empty country has a meditative quality that I think most people who've done it understand. You're awake and alert, but the alertness doesn't cost anything because there's nothing to be alert about. You're just moving through space, and the space is so large that it flattens your problems into scale. I stopped for gas in a town called Ozona around 10:30 at night, and that's where the drive changed. I should describe Ozona so you understand what I mean when I say I noticed the other car immediately. Ozona, Texas is a town of about 3,000 people on I-10 between Fort Stockton and Junction. At 10:30 on a Tuesday night in October, it was functionally closed. The gas station I pulled into was a Stripes, with fluorescent canopy lights that made everything under them look flat and washed out, and everything beyond them looked like a wall of ink. There were 2 other vehicles at the pumps, a white Julie with ranch plates, and a dark sedan parked at the pump nearest the road, not fueling, just sitting there with its lights off. I didn't think anything of it. People park at gas stations to check their phones, rest their eyes, or wait for someone. I filled my tank, used the restroom inside, bought a bottle of water and a package of peanut butter crackers. When I came out, the white Julie was gone. The dark sedan was still there. Still no lights. Still no visible driver movement. The windows were tinted or just dark enough in the ambient light that I couldn't see inside. I pulled back onto I-10 eastbound. Within 30 seconds, headlights appeared behind me. This is the part that is hard to describe without it sounding mundane. Headlights behind you on an interstate at night are completely normal. They're constant. The entire time I'd been driving through Texas, there had been headlights behind me at various distances. Trucks, other cars, people passing, people falling back. It's the ordinary visual texture of night driving. So when I say I noticed these headlights, I need to explain what made them different, and the honest answer is, at first, nothing. They were just headlights. 2 white points in my rearview mirror, maybe a quarter mile back, matching my speed. I was doing 75. The speed limit was 80, so I was actually a little slow. But the car behind me didn't close the gap. It stayed at that quarter mile distance, exactly. I drove for 20 minutes. The headlights didn't change. I drove for 40 minutes. The headlights didn't change. Somewhere past Sonora, I tested it the way you do when you're alone at night, and your brain is starting to tell you a story you don't want to hear. I sped up to 80. I watched the mirror. The headlights stayed exactly where they were. Same distance, same brightness, same position in the lane. I slowed down to 65. The headlights held. I slowed down to 55, well below the speed limit on a highway where most people are doing 85. The headlights held. Same quarter mile, no closer, no farther. As if the distance between us was a physical rod connecting the two vehicles. This is the point where you tell yourself it's a coincidence. Someone else is driving the same direction at roughly the same speed, and your brain is constructing a pattern out of boredom and darkness and too many hours behind the wheel. I told myself exactly that. I said it out loud. It's just another car. And then I took the next exit, Junction, Texas, and the headlights took the exit too. Junction at 11:15 at night was a collection of closed businesses along the access road and a Dairy Queen with its sign still lit, but its lot empty. I turned right off the exit ramp, drove about a quarter mile along the access road, pulled into the Dairy Queen lot and parked. I turned off my headlights. I sat there. The dark car, because it was one car, I was certain of that now, had turned right off the same exit ramp. It was now parked on the shoulder of the access road, about 200 yards behind me. Its headlights were off. It was just a shape against the slightly less dark background of a closed feed store. I sat in the Dairy Queen lot for 7 minutes. I know the time because I watched the clock on my dashboard. During those 7 minutes, the car did not move. It did not turn on its lights. No door opened. Nothing about it changed. At minute 7, I started my engine, pulled out of the lot, and got back on I-10 East via the on-ramp. I checked my mirror as I merged. The headlights reappeared. Same distance, quarter mile. Perfectly matched. My hands were tight on the wheel now. My calm was gone. I'd entered the part of the drive where the quality of the darkness changes. Not literally, but in your body. The same empty road that felt meditative an hour ago now felt like a corridor, like something with walls I couldn't see. And the headlights behind me were no longer headlights behind me. They were the visible proof that I was inside something I hadn't noticed entering. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I've gone over it many times, and I want you to understand that I was not panicking. I was afraid, but I was functioning. I was making decisions the way you make decisions when something is wrong and you don't yet know how wrong. I called 911. The dispatcher was a woman with a Kimball County accent who asked me my location and the nature of my emergency. I told her I was on I-10 eastbound between Junction and Mason, and that a vehicle had been following me at a fixed distance for approximately 50 miles, and had followed me off and back onto the interstate. She asked me to describe the vehicle. I said it was a dark sedan, possibly black or very dark blue, and I could not read the plates because it was too far behind me, and its headlights washed out the rear detail. She asked me if the vehicle had made any aggressive moves. I said no. She asked me if I'd conflicted with anyone recently. I said no. She told me she could dispatch a trooper to my location, but the nearest unit was about 25 minutes out, and she recommended I keep driving at a steady speed and stay on the interstate, and not stop until I reached a well-lit, populated area or the trooper reached me. I thanked her and hung up. 19 minutes later, not 25, headlights appeared ahead of me, coming from the shoulder. A highway patrol SUV pulled onto the road and fell in behind me. Its lights came on. I thought it was pulling me over, so I slowed and moved to the shoulder, but it passed me and continued east. I watched its tail lights shrink. Then I checked my mirror. The headlights were gone. The road behind me was empty, completely dark. I drove for 2 more minutes to make sure. Nothing. The follower had vanished the moment the trooper appeared. I let out a breath that felt like it had been pressurized inside my ribs for an hour. My hands were shaking. I was sweating despite the AC. I turned the radio on just to have a human voice in the car and drove for another 30 miles, feeling the way you feel after a near miss, grateful and jittery, and not quite trusting that it's actually over. I should have kept feeling that way. Instead, I got tired. The adrenaline is metabolized. The road was empty. The sky was enormous. By the time I crossed into the hill country outside Mason, my heart rate was normal, and I was telling myself the same story everyone tells themselves. Someone was messing with me. They saw the cop. They bailed. Weird night. Scary for a minute. Over now. I stopped for gas and coffee in Brady, Texas around midnight. The station was a Love's travel stop. Big, well lit, with truckers coming and going. I fueled up. I used the restroom. I bought the largest coffee they had. I walked around the parking lot for 5 minutes to stretch my legs. I scanned every parked vehicle. No dark sedan. No one is watching me. I felt silly for looking. I got back on the road. I had about 13 hours to Knoxville. I turned the podcast back on. I settled in. At 12:41 a.m., the headlights reappeared. Same distance, same lane position, same quarter mile as if measured with a ruler. I saw them materialize in my rearview mirror the way a thought surfaces. One moment there was darkness, and then there was the light, and I could not identify the exact second it appeared. My body responded before my mind did. My hands clenched, my jaw locked. Something in my stomach dropped, not with surprise, but with recognition. The way your body reacts to a sound it's heard before. Not a startle, a recall. I did not call 911 again. I will explain why. Instead, I drove. I drove at 80 and watched the lights hold. I drove at 60 and watched them hold. I changed lanes, left, then right, and the lights mirrored the move with a delay of about 2 seconds. I turned my headlights off for 3 seconds, which is dangerous and illegal, and the following car's lights went off at the same time. The same instant. Not mirroring. Synchronized. When I turned mine back on, its lights returned simultaneously, as though our electrical systems were wired together. That was the first moment I felt something beyond fear. I felt the specific vertigo of a rule revealing itself. Not a person following me, not a road rage incident or a predatory driver. A behavior pattern that responded to my inputs with mechanical consistency, as if I were interacting with a system, not a driver. I drove another 40 miles to the town of Eden, Texas. I did not exit. I wanted to see if it would follow me off the highway again, but I also didn't want to be on a dark access road with it. I kept driving. I watched the headlights in my mirror the way you watch a needle on a gauge, not for information, but for deviation. Any change in distance or brightness would mean something. No change also meant something. No change. At 1:30 in the morning, I crossed from I-10 onto US 87, heading north towards San Angelo. This is a 2-lane highway, no median, no shoulder to speak of in places. The character of the road changed. The interstate had felt like a corridor. This felt like a seam. The headlights followed me onto 87. Same distance, but on a 2-lane road, the geometry was different. The headlights were directly behind me now, not offset to one side the way they'd been on the wide interstate. They filled my rearview mirror. The light was brighter, or it seemed brighter because the surrounding darkness was more absolute. No truck traffic, no oncoming headlights, just mesquite scrub and fence posts caught in the edge of my beams and then swallowed. I need to tell you about the radio. I'd had the podcast playing through my phone connected to the car's Bluetooth. At 1:47 a.m., I know the exact time because I looked at the clock the instant it happened. The podcast cut out. Not buffering, not losing signal. It stopped cleanly, mid-sentence, and the car's audio system switched to FM radio. I had not touched anything. The system switched itself. The station it landed on was static, not the hissing, searching static of an untuned frequency. A flat, dense static, like the sound of heavy rain on a metal roof, with a low tone beneath it that pulsed. Not rhythmically, not like a heartbeat or a signal, more like breathing, like something inhaling and exhaling into a microphone at very close range. I reached for the dial to change the station. Before my fingers touched it, a voice came through. It was a woman's voice, calm, clear, mid-sentence, as though she'd been speaking for some time and I'd only just tuned in. At the Greenfield Road turnoff, she's been there since 11. Her car won't start and she doesn't have a signal. If anyone is on 87 northbound, please help. She's alone and it's cold tonight. Then the static resumed, the breathing sound, and then silence. The system switched back to Bluetooth. My podcast resumed exactly where it had left off. I I drove for 6 more miles in a state I can only describe as divided. Half of my brain was processing the voice as a CB bleed over, a radio anomaly, some cross-frequency pickup from a local channel. The other half was watching the headlights in my mirror and understanding that the voice had come from the same direction, behind me, like the headlights. Greenfield Road. I didn't know where that was. I didn't have a data signal to check. US 87 through this part of Texas is a dead zone. But my car's GPS had offline maps loaded, and I glanced at the screen. There was a Greenfield Road intersection about 4 miles ahead. A county road crosses the highway. I had a decision to make. I want to be honest about the calculation, because I think the calculation is the point. If I drove past the intersection, I would be ignoring a potential stranded motorist. A woman alone on a cold night in the middle of nowhere with no phone signal. That is a real thing that happens, and people die from it. Exposure, dehydration, wrong person stopping. Every year. If the voice was real, if someone was actually there, driving past made me the person who heard and didn't stop. But the voice had come through my radio on a frequency I hadn't selected, at a time when my audio system had switched without my input, while something was following me that did not behave like a car driven by a human being. The two interpretations could not coexist. Either someone needed help and the radio bleed was coincidental, or the radio was part of the pattern, and the person at the intersection was part of the pattern, and stopping was exactly what the pattern wanted me to do. I slowed down as I approached Greenfield Road. My headlights caught the intersection. A gravel county road crossing the highway at a right angle, heading off into darkness in both directions. No lights, no buildings, no vehicle. I looked right. I looked left. Nothing. I let out a breath. No one there. Decision made for me. I accelerated. And then, maybe 100 yards past the intersection, I saw it. Not on the road, off to the left, about 50 yards into a flat expanse of dry grass. A car, dark-coloured, dome light on. I could see it because the dome light made a small, warm rectangle in the blackness, like a window in a house that was otherwise invisible. I passed it in 2 seconds at 70 miles an hour. In those 2 seconds, I saw a figure in the driver's seat, leaning against the window, not moving. I watched my rear view. The dome light was a tiny point of amber, shrinking. The headlights behind me were still there, same distance, same brightness. And now, I swear this to you, they were slightly closer. Not much, maybe 50 yards closer than they'd been all night, as though the quarter-mile rod had shortened by a small, specific increment, as though my failure to stop had changed a variable. That is the moment I stopped telling myself this was a person. I drove through San Angelo at 2 in the morning without stopping. The city was asleep. Streetlights and closed gas stations and empty intersections cycling green to yellow to red for no one. I took US 277 north toward Abilene. The follower stayed. The headlights were perceptibly closer now. I estimated 200 yards instead of a quarter mile. Still too far to see the vehicle in detail, just the lights. But the closure was unmistakable. On 277, 20 miles north of San Angelo, the radio switched again. Same process. Podcast cut, FM static, breathing sound, and then the voice. Same woman, same calm, clear diction. At the bridge on County Road 412, his tire blew and he went into the ditch. He's not hurt, but he can't get the car out, and his phone is dead. If anyone is on 277 northbound, please. He's an older man. He's been out here 3 hours. Static. Silence. Podcast. I checked my GPS. County Road 412 crossed 277 about 7 miles ahead. The road was straight and empty. I was the only car on it. I and whatever was behind me. I gripped the wheel and thought. The first time, Greenfield Road, I'd had a justification for not stopping. The car was off the road. It could have been abandoned. The figure could have been a jacket on the seat. At 70 miles an hour, I could tell myself I wasn't sure of what I'd seen. But I'd been sure. I'd seen the dome light. I'd seen the person. Now here was a second call, a second person, and the follower was closer. I felt with a cold, structural clarity the shape of what was being done to me. I was being presented with choices. Real people, maybe real people, possibly real people, in real distress along my route, and each time I passed without stopping, the follower gained ground. The distance between us was a function of my decisions. My willingness to stop was being measured, and my refusal was being answered. This is the moral problem I could not solve while driving, because if the people were real, then I was monstrous for not helping them. And if the people were manufactured, lures, projections, some mechanism of the thing behind me, then stopping would put me in proximity to something I did not understand on a dark road with no witnesses. Both options were rational. Both options were dangerous. And I could not know which danger was real because the system, and I was now thinking of it as a system, was designed so that the compassionate choice and the suicidal choice were identical from the outside. I reached the County Road 412 bridge. I slowed. I saw it. A truck in the ditch to the right. A white pickup, nose down at a 30-degree angle. No dome light this time,
but a person standing on the roadside. A man, older, wearing a pale jacket. He was looking toward my headlights. He raised one hand, not waving frantically, just a calm, tired raise. A man who'd been waiting a long time. I slowed to 40, 30. I could see his face now in the spill of my headlights. Weathered, 60s or 70s, squinting against the light. He looked real. He looked completely real. I looked at my rear view. The headlights behind me were maybe 150 yards back, closer again, and they were slowing exactly as I slowed. I stopped. I sat in my car with my foot on the brake and my hands on the wheel, and the man 20 feet away was looking at me with an expression I will never be able to fully describe. It was patient. It was known, not threatening, not afraid. He looked like someone who understood that I was making a decision, and he was willing to wait for me to make it, and he already knew what I would choose. I took my foot off the brake and accelerated. I left him there. I watched him shrink in the mirror until the darkness folded over him, and then there was nothing behind me except the headlights, and they were closer. I need to tell you what the next 2 hours were like, because the next 2 hours are when I understood what I was actually inside. I drove north and east through the dark center of Texas, Abilene, then northeast on back highways toward Dallas, and the radio interruptions continued, not at regular intervals, not at predictable distances, but with increasing specificity and increasing emotional precision. The third call, a teenager whose motorcycle had broken down on a ranch road. The voice described his age, his jacket, and the exact mile marker. I didn't see anyone when I passed the location, but I was doing 85, and I didn't look hard. The headlights behind me closed to about 100 yards. The fourth call, a woman and a child in a minivan with a overheating engine. The voice described the child's age, 4, the make and color of the minivan, green Dodge Caravan. I saw the van. It was real. It was on the shoulder with its hazards on. I saw the orange flash of the hazard lights as I passed. I did not stop. The follower closed to 75 yards. The fifth call, an elderly man on foot, walking, on the highway. The voice said he was confused, possibly disoriented, that he'd walked away from a house and couldn't find his way back. She said his name, Gerald. She said he was wearing a bathrobe. I saw him. He was in the right lane, walking in the same direction I was driving, and my headlights caught him for a full 5 seconds before I swerved into the oncoming lane to avoid him. A thin, elderly man in a brown bathrobe and house slippers was walking on a highway at 3 a.m. with no light and no reflective material, and he didn't turn to look at my car as I passed. I was crying. I want you to know that. I was crying and driving and shaking, and the headlights behind me were 50 yards back now, and I could see for the first time the outline of the vehicle in the glow of its own lights. It was dark. It was a sedan. It had no front plate, and its headlights were wrong. Too white, too uniform, no visible bulb or housing. Just 2 flat, even panels of light, like the car's face had been replaced with something luminous. And I did not stop. I didn't stop because I had figured out the rule, or I thought I had. And the rule was this. Each person I passed without helping closed the distance. Each refusal cost me space. And at some point, at some distance, the gap would close to 0, and the follower would reach me, and something would happen that I could not predict and could not survive. The rule meant I should stop. The rule meant the compassionate choice was also the survival choice. Help someone and maybe the distance resets. Maybe the follower falls back. But I couldn't trust the rule. I couldn't trust it because the rule was too clean, too moral, too perfectly aligned with what a good person would do. And the scenarios were too well constructed, each one more emotionally compelling than the last, each one harder to drive past. They were escalating. Whoever or whatever was behind me was studying my responses and calibrating. The teenager was easier to pass than the woman with the child, who was easier to pass than the elderly man on foot. The system was learning my threshold. It was searching for the scenario that would make me stop. And I did not believe, I could not believe, that what happened when I stopped would be the thing the system was advertising. I believed the system wanted me to stop. I believed the system wanted me out of my car, on foot, in the dark, next to a person who may or may not be real, with the follower 50 yards behind me and closing. So I kept driving, and I kept passing people. And each one cost me distance, and each one cost me something else too, something quieter, something that I felt in my chest as a kind of tearing, because some of them were real. I'm certain some of them were real. The man in the bathrobe was real. The minivan with the hazards was real, and I left them there because I was afraid to stop, and I will carry that for the rest of my life, and no explanation of what was happening that night will make that weight lighter. I hit the outskirts of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex at 4:40 in the morning, and the follower dropped back. I felt it before I saw it. The quality of the road changed. Streetlights appeared. Other cars appeared. A trickle at first, then a steady flow. Early commuters. Delivery trucks. The infrastructure of a city sway waking up. And the headlights behind me, which had closed to maybe 30 yards, close enough that I could see the shape of the sedan in my rear view, close enough that its light filled my mirrors and made me squint, fell back 50 yards, 100, 200. The lights dimmed, or seemed to dim, and then, as I merged onto I-30 eastbound and the highway widened to 4 lanes, and the traffic thickened, the headlights disappeared. I drove through Dallas in the pre-dawn dark with my hands still shaking and my face still wet. I stopped at a gas station in Mesquite and sat in the parking lot under the canopy lights for 45 minutes. I didn't get out of the car. I watched the entrance from the road. I watched every vehicle that pulled in. None of them was a dark sedan with flat white headlights. I bought gas. I went inside. The clerk was a young man who looked half asleep. I asked him if he'd heard any reports of stranded motorists on the rural highways west of the city. He looked at me blankly and said he hadn't. I bought coffee and a breakfast sandwich and went back to my car. I had about 9 hours to Knoxville. It was 5:30 a.m. The sun would be up in less than an hour. I decided to keep driving. I wanted to be done. I wanted to be inside a building with locked doors and walls and a floor that didn't move. I got back on I-30 East. The highway was busy now, city traffic, the morning pulse of a metropolitan area. The sun came up over the horizon at 6:18 a.m. and the light felt like a physical substance entering the car. Like warmth, but not thermal warmth, structural warmth. The warmth of things being visible, of shapes having edges, of the world being three-dimensional and legible again. I drove through the morning across Arkansas. The Ouachita Mountains were green and gold, and the road curved through them in long, sweeping arcs. And I had the windows down, and the air was cool and smelled like pine and earth. I felt gradually the way you feel after a high fever breaks. Wrung out. Light. Suspicious of your own improvement. No follower, no headlights, no radio interruptions. The road was just a road. The other cars were just cars with visible drivers, the bumper stickers and bicycle racks. The world was ordinary, and its ordinariness was so overwhelming that I started to doubt my own memory of the night. Not the facts. I could not doubt the facts because my body still carried them. My hands still ached from gripping the wheel, but the interpretation. Maybe the sedan was a real person with a real reason. Maybe the radio was a CB bleed-over. Maybe the people on the road were real people I should have helped, and the only horror of the night was that I'd been too afraid to stop. I crossed into Tennessee in the early afternoon. I stopped for lunch at a diner outside Memphis and ate a meal I don't remember. I got back on the road. I had 4 hours left. I want to tell you about the phone call, because the phone call is the part that ruined the theory that any of it was in my head. At 3:15 in the afternoon Central Time, I was on I-40 eastbound between Jackson and Cookeville, Tennessee. Broad daylight, heavy traffic. My phone rang. The caller ID said no caller ID. I almost didn't answer. But I'd been expecting a call from my friend in Knoxville confirming the apartment was ready, and she had a habit of calling from her work landline, which sometimes showed up unlabeled. I answered. Static. not phone static. The same static from the radio, the same dense rain-on-metal sound with the same low breathing tone beneath it. Then the woman's voice. Same woman, same calm, clear diction. But she was not making a distress call this time. She was speaking directly to me. "You passed 6, she said. "Do you know that? You passed 6. 5 were real. 1 was not. Do you know which? I don't think you do. I think you'll want to find out. I think you'll drive back." And then the call ended.
I pulled over. I pulled onto the shoulder of I-40 in broad daylight with 18-wheelers blasting past me, and sat there gripping my phone with both hands. And I want to tell you what those sentences did to me, because I think they were designed with more precision than anything else that happened that night. 5 were real, meaning 5 real people on real roads in real distress, who I drove past because I was afraid of something behind me. 5 people I could have helped. 5 people who might have sat on that shoulder all night. The man in the bathrobe, the woman with the 4-year-old, the teenager with the motorcycle. Gerald, whom she'd called by name. 1 was not, meaning one of them was manufactured, a lure, part of the system. And if I'd stopped for that one, whichever one it was, something would have happened. Something the distance was measuring my approach toward. So my instinct to keep driving was not entirely wrong. It was not cowardice. It was the correct survival response to 1/6 of the stimuli, but only 1/6. I think you'll drive back, because now I knew that 5 real people had needed help, and I hadn't given it. And the only way to make that right was to go back, to retrace my route. At night, on the same roads, with the same follower presumably waiting. The voice hadn't asked me to do anything. She'd just given me the information that made doing nothing unbearable. I drove the remaining 3 hours to Knoxville in a state that I'd describe as functional dissociation. I navigated, I signaled, I obeyed traffic laws, but the part of me that makes meaning was locked in a room with the phone call, turning it over, pressing on it, looking for the seam. I arrived at my friend's house in Knoxville at 6:30 in the evening. Her name is Dana. The garage apartment was small and clean, and she'd put towels on the bed and the bottle of wine on the counter. She hugged me and asked how the drive was. I said it was long. She said I looked exhausted. I said I was. I carried my boxes upstairs. I unpacked the essentials. I showered and stood under the water for a very long time. I got into bed at 8 o'clock. I did not sleep. At midnight, I got up, opened my laptop, and searched for news reports from the roads I'd driven. I searched for stranded motorists in Tom Green County, Runnels County, Taylor County, and the areas around San Angelo and Abilene. I searched for missing elderly men in the region. I searched for a man named Gerald. I found an article. It was from a local ABC affiliate in San Angelo, published the day after my drive, Wednesday morning. The headline was, "Elderly man found walking on Highway 277 overnight, treated for hypothermia." The article said a 73-year-old man had been found walking on US 277 north of San Angelo at approximately 4:15 in the morning by a truck driver. He was disoriented and wearing a bathrobe and house slippers. He had walked away from a memory care facility 2 miles from the highway. He was treated for mild hypothermia and returned to the facility. His condition was described as stable. The article didn't give his name, but the voice had. Gerald. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark in an apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I felt the full weight of the drive settle onto me like a second body lying on top of mine, pressing me into the mattress. I could have stopped. I should have stopped. He was real. He was 73 years old and confused and walking on a highway in a bathrobe in the middle of the night. And I swerved around him at 80 miles an hour because I was afraid of headlights in my mirror. He survived, not because of me, despite me. I spent the next week settling into Knoxville. I started a part-time job at a garden center. I unpacked my boxes. I called my mother's estate attorney and signed the final paperwork. I did the things you do when you're building a life somewhere, and I did them with the same functional dissociation I'd driven the last 3 hours of the trip with. Present but partitioned. I did not drive at night. I biked to work. I walked to the grocery store. I used my car once in daylight to drive to a Walmart for household supplies, and I found myself checking the rearview mirror every 30 seconds for no reason I could articulate. And when I parked, I sat in the lot and watched the traffic for 15 minutes before going inside. On the 8th night, my car radio turned on. I was in the apartment. The car was parked in the driveway below. At 2:13 in the morning, I heard it, faintly, through the closed window, through the floor. The sound of FM static is coming from my car's speakers. I went to the window and looked down. The car was dark, no dome light, no headlights, but I could hear the static. The same dense, breathing static. I did not go down to the car. I stood at the window and listened until it stopped, about 4 minutes later. Then I went back to bed and did not sleep. It happened again 3 nights later, and again 2 nights after that. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the same static. Never the voice, just the sound, like a frequency being held open, like a channel being kept warm. On the 3rd occurrence, I went downstairs. I stood next to my car in the driveway in the dark, and the static was coming from the speakers clearly now, and I could hear the breathing beneath it. And I reached through the open window and turned the radio off. The knob clicked. The static stopped. The headlights appeared at the end of the street. I don't know how to tell you this in a way that conveys the physiological reality of seeing them. They were 3 blocks away at the far intersection. 2 flat white panels of light, not moving, just on. The dark shape of the sedan behind them was barely visible. I went back inside. I locked the door. I went to the window and looked down. The headlights were gone. My car was silent. Dana asked me a few days later if I was sleeping. I told her I wasn't, not well. She asked if it was grief, my mother. I said yes, because that was easier and partly true. She gave me the name of a therapist she liked. I went to the therapist once. Her name was Dr. Ellison. I told her about my mother. I told her about the move. I did not tell her about the drive. When she asked if I was experiencing any anxiety symptoms, I described the hypervigilance I felt while driving, and she nodded and said that was a common grief response.
the subconscious fear that the world is more dangerous than you previously believed, activated by your parents' death. She gave me a breathing exercise. I thanked her and didn't go back. I didn't go back because the breathing exercise wouldn't help, not because it wasn't good advice for a grief response, because what I had was not a grief response. What I had was a car that turned on in the middle of the night by itself, and a set of headlights 3 blocks from my house, and 5 real people I'd driven past in the dark, and a voice that had told me the exact number. I spent 2 weeks trying not to think about it. I failed. Here is what I thought about. The voice had said 5 were real and 1 was not. 6 total. I could reconstruct 6 specific calls. The woman at Greenfield Road, the man with the blown tire at County Road 412, the teenager on the Ranch Road, the woman and child in the minivan, the man on foot, Gerald, and one more I haven't mentioned yet because it came in the last stretch before Dallas, and I passed the location without seeing anyone. 6 calls, 5 real, 1 fake. The question was, which one was the fake? And the answer mattered. Not abstractly, not morally, because the fake was the one where stopping would have been dangerous. The 5 real ones were the ones where stopping would have been the right thing to do. If I could determine which was the fake, I could prove to myself that my instinct had been at least partially valid, that I'd been right to be afraid of at least one of them. But I couldn't determine it. I had no way to know. The only way to know would be to go back and find the people, and the only people I could find would be the real ones, which would only narrow the fake to the remaining candidate. And the remaining candidate would be the one I couldn't verify because it was never real. The system was designed so that the answer was permanently out of reach, close enough to obsess over, far enough to never resolve. And that was the trap. Not the headlights, not the distance, not the radio. The trap was the question. The question was the engine that would make me go back. I did not go back. I need to tell you what I did instead and what happened because of it. In the 3rd week after my arrival, I sold the car. I posted it on a local classified site. I priced it low, $5,000 below book value, because I wanted it gone fast. A man named Dale responded within an hour. He drove out from Maryville, looked at the car, drove it around the block, and paid in cash. I signed the title over. I watched him drive away in my CRV, with everything I'd experienced still in its speakers and its mirrors. And I felt a complicated mixture of relief and guilt that I didn't have a word for. I bought a bicycle. I arranged my life within a 3-mile radius. I did not drive. I didn't even ride in other people's cars if I could help it. Dana drove me to the grocery store once, and I sat in her passenger seat with my hands on my knees and my eyes on her rearview mirror for the entire 8-minute drive. She asked me again if I was okay, and I said I was. 2 weeks after I sold the car, Dale called me. He was polite, He said the car was great, no mechanical problems, just one thing. The radio kept turning on at night by itself. Static. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. He'd had it looked at by a mechanic, and they couldn't find an electrical fault. He asked me if I'd had the same problem. I told him I had. I told him it was an intermittent electrical issue that I'd never been able to diagnose, and I apologized for not mentioning it. He said it was no big deal, he just wanted to make sure it wasn't something serious. I said it wasn't. He thanked me and hung up. He called me again a week later. He was less polite this time. He said the radio was still turning on, but now it was playing something, not static. A voice. A woman's voice making what sounded like distress calls, describing people stranded on roads, giving mile markers and descriptions. He said his wife had heard it and was upset. He asked me what was wrong with the car. I did not tell him. I said I didn't know. I said I was sorry. I suggested he disconnect the radio fuse. He said he had. The sound came through the speakers anyway. I hung up. I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt before. Not fear for myself, but fear for Dale. For Dale's wife. For whoever drove that car at night on an empty road and heard the voice and saw the headlights and was presented with the same choices I'd been presented with. 5 real. 1 not. The system was in the car. Or the system followed the car. Or the system was attracted to the car because I'd driven it through whatever territory I'd driven it through, and now it carried a trace, a residue, a frequency. I called Dale back the next day and offered to buy the car back at full price. He said he'd already sold it. To his nephew, in Chattanooga. I can't tell you the rest of this story with the same detail because the rest of it didn't happen to me. It happened around me, at a distance, through second-hand reports, public records, and one very long conversation with a woman I found through a forum. The car changed hands twice more in the months after Dale's nephew got it. I tracked it through the title records, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not. The third owner was a college student in Atlanta. The fourth owner was a delivery driver in Birmingham. I found the delivery driver because he posted about it online, in a forum for automotive electrical problems. He described the radio turning on at night. He described the static. He described the voice. He described, in a post that was 300 words long and shaking with the energy of someone who needed to be believed, a drive he'd taken from Birmingham to Montgomery at 1 a.m. for a delivery, and the headlights that appeared behind him and matched his speed at a fixed distance, and the voice describing a stranded motorist at a specific mile marker, and the person he'd seen on the shoulder of I-65 in the dark. He'd stopped. He wrote that he'd stopped. He'd pulled over and gotten out and walked toward the person on the shoulder, and the person was a woman sitting in a folding chair next to a car with its hood up, and she'd looked at him and smiled, and her smile was wrong. He said the word wrong 3 times in the post, and the headlights behind his car had flashed once, and then the woman and the chair and the broken-down car were gone. Not gone as they drove away. Gone like they were subtracted. And the headlights behind his car went dark, and the road was empty, and he stood on the shoulder of A65 alone at 1 a.m, feeling like he'd been deposited there by something that was finished with him. He wrote, "I think it wanted me to stop, and I think the stopping was the test, and I think I passed, but I don't know what I passed into." I messaged him. We talked on the phone for 2 hours. His name was Corey. He'd sold the car immediately afterward. He didn't know who had it now. Here is what I think. I'm not presenting this as the truth because I don't have the truth. I have a shape that fits the facts, and the facts are strange enough that any shape I fit to them will be strange. I think there is something on the roads at night in the parts of the country where the dark is big enough and the traffic is sparse enough for it to operate. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a thing or a condition or a property of certain stretches of road at certain hours. I think it presents itself as headlights because headlights are the visual grammar of the road at night. They're how vehicles announce themselves, and this thing announces itself in the language of its environment. I think the voice is part of it. I think the distress calls are real. I think real people are stranded on those roads and the thing knows where they are, not because it put them there, but because it inhabits the same space they're in. The empty road at night, the gap between towns, the zone where the signal fails and help is far away. And I think it uses their real distress to test the people it follows, and the test is whether you'll stop. I think stopping is dangerous. And I think not stopping is worse, not because of the distance closing, though the distance does close, but because of what not stopping does to you, what it did to me. I drove past 5 real people in one night, and I have not been the same person since, not because of the supernatural or the unexplainable, because I discovered under pressure that my survival instinct would override my compassion every single time, without exception, for hours, through escalating scenarios designed to find the one that would break me. None of them broke me. I passed all 6, and the voice on the phone told me the number so I would know exactly how many times I chose myself. I think the thing on the road isn't trying to catch you. I think it's trying to show you what you are, and I think the revelation is the horror. Not the headlights, not the voice, not the impossible synchronized driving or the radio that turns itself on at 2 a.m. The horror is the mirror. The thing behind you is a mirror, and it has headlights, and it is patient, and it will follow you until you look. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't drive much at all. I bike, I walk, I take the bus. I've restructured my entire life around the avoidance of empty roads after dark, and I've told myself it's environmental consciousness or physical fitness or just preference. But it isn't. It's that I can't be in a car at night without checking the mirror, and I can't check the mirror without seeing headlights, even when there are no headlights. The image is installed in me, the 2 white points at a fixed distance, the flat, luminous panels where a car's face should be. I'm selling my bicycle next month, not because of the headlights. Bicycles don't have rear-view mirrors, because I've started hearing the static, faintly, at 2 a.m, not from a car radio, from the air itself, from the direction of the road outside my apartment, the dense, breathing static with the low tone beneath it, pulsing like something inhaling and exhaling at close range. And last week, for the first time, I heard the voice again, clear and calm through my bedroom window at 2:27 a.m. On Magnolia Avenue, 3 blocks east. She's locked out. Her phone is dead. It's cold tonight. If anyone can hear this, please. I went to the window. I looked down at the street. Magnolia Avenue runs east-west, 2 blocks south of my building. I couldn't see anything, but 3 blocks east at the edge of my sight line, I could see a shape under a streetlight. A person, standing very still, looking in my direction. I didn't go outside. I stood at the window and watched. The person stood under the streetlight. Neither of us moved. After 11 minutes, the figure walked away, slowly, like someone who'd been waiting for an answer and received one. I went back to bed. I lay in the dark and listened to the static fade. It occurs to me now, and this is the thought I will leave you with because it's the thought I can't stop turning over, that the system has adapted. It followed the car, and then it followed the frequency, and now it follows me, not on highways, not with headlights. It has located me in my city, in my neighborhood, in my apartment, and it is doing again what it did on the road, placing real people in distress within my reach and watching to see if I'll help them. And the people are real. The woman locked out in the cold is real. I checked the next morning. A neighbor 3 blocks east posted on a community forum that she'd been locked out of her apartment for 2 hours Tuesday night and couldn't reach anyone. She was real, and I didn't help her, and the static is still here, and the question is still the same question it was on a highway in Texas at 2 a.m, with a man in a bathrobe walking in my headlights. What am I? I don't have an answer. But the thing behind me does. It's had an answer since Ozona, and it's waiting, with the patience of something that doesn't experience time the way I do, for me to arrive at the same conclusion it reached about me on the first night, on the first road, in the first dark. I just hope it's wrong. I don't think it is. Don't.